of course, my thoughts are a mix between an academic point of view on the role of the G20 and my experience in my G20 St. Petersburg. I attended the one in St. Petersburg in 2013, representing my country, Italy. And so my general point is about I'm a true fan of the G20. I'm a great supporter of the G20. I was always pushing and supporting the raise of the G20's role, and I fear about the decrease of the G20's role. And this is why I'm here also to push and to say that China, in the hands of Chinese leadership, but not only Chinese leadership, also Chinese communities, Chinese experts, is the future of G20, because G20 is at a turning point. This G20 meeting 2016 can represent the turning point, if not, the decrease of the role of the G20 will continue. So my 3 points: the first one, a brief point about how and why I think we are entering a third phase of the G20 history. A second point about the relationship between G20 and the other international organizations and institutions. And a third point, some very modest suggestions to the Chinese presidency of the G20 this year. So my first point is about the history. We had a first period, a second period, and now, in my view, we entered a third period of the G20. The first period was the beginning, and the first period was linked to the financial crisis. The G20 was born because of the financial crisis, and the first 3, 4 years, 5 years were very much linked to responses, immediate responses to the financial crisis. The G20 was a success at the beginning. It was a success because of the concrete responses. I quote just 2 subjects in which I think these very concrete responses were showing that G20 was better than G7, if I can. First, the very, very important statement, decisions, and applications of the decision about protectionism. At the very beginning of the crisis, the fear of everybody was we risk a new rise of protectionism as immediate natural response to the crisis. And the G20 decided to block any risk or any possibility to have a new protectionism. And this decision was very important since the beginning, and I think it was a very concrete decision and very effective one. The second one, it was the fight against fiscal evasion around the world. I think on this topic, G20 showed how effective can be decisions at this level. And you know very well that G20 is not a binding framework. So it is a voluntary activity. And the fact that we decided and we implemented and we succeeded in the implementation on many decisions on fiscal evasion, faith, and or fight against fiscal havens was, in my view, another concrete experience. So this first phase was followed by a second one. The second one was the last G20 meetings, where the difficulty of the financial crisis were less urgent, and the G20 became also, because of, I think, some leadership in the last years of the G20 meeting with a different approach, the G20 became, I think, less relevant. The last meetings were less relevant than the previous one, not only because of the first meetings were in the very heart of the crisis, and the G20 worked also as a fireman in the period of the crisis, but also because of a lack of ambitions. A lack of ambitions. Now we are maybe entering a third phase. It depends on the Chinese leadership. It depends on the Chinese G20. The G20 depends very much on the presidency mission, on the presidency work. You know very well there's no general secretariat, and so it depends very much on the presidency, on the leadership. And this is why I think it was important to have China's leadership this year, because we need fresh air. We need to combine the will of the president, of the leader, to be very much involved and to have a success. This is why my point on history is linked to this third phase. Second point, very brief, on the relationship with the other international organizations and institutions. I think G20 needs to be really in a very short ties with the rest of the international organization. If not, the G20 risks to be full of words and empty of implementations. Implementations are in the hands of countries, governments, and international organizations. This is why, for instance, the role of WTO in linked to the G20 activities is crucial. This is why the FSB role is important too. It was one of the realization. I see the FSB as the right hand of the G20, and it is possible to have, as we had at the very beginning of the history of the G20, and of course the UN. For instance, it's impossible for the G20 not to speak about migrations, not to speak about refugee crisis, but the tools are in the hands of regional organizations, I mean the European Union, for instance, and in the hands of the UN. This is why we need a strong tie between G20, the regional organizations, and the UN and the rest of the international. My third and last point, because I at the end of my 10 minutes, is about suggestions to the Chinese leadership. I don't think Chinese leadership needs any suggestion, but I think it is good for a Chinese audience to hear how important is, from a Western and a European point of view, his leadership in the G20 today. How high is the level of expectations, and how important for the next G20 meeting not to be a ceremonial meeting. It is not a question of liturgies and ceremonies. It's necessary to have a very effective, concrete, full of concrete subjects and full of decisions. It is important to have a meeting convening around the leaders, many important people around the world, not only from government and politics, but also from the civil society, from the business society, I would say from the star system too. Not people like Donald Trump, but people like true star system people, being there and to help G20's decision to be well connected with the people, with the public opinion in our countries. That is one of the key issues, because the leaders are not enough. We need also to help the leaders to talk and to be listened by large public opinions. Second point is about, I think the agenda has to be an ambitious one. Launching projects and giving clearly the mandate to follow this project to the different bodies, institutions, governments, and so on and so forth. Third, the leadership of the G20 has to be very flexible. That means it is impossible to have a rigid agenda without any possibility to adapt this agenda with the news of the last weeks or days in August or in September when the G20 meeting will take place. It is absolutely necessary because today, if the leaders of the world give the feeling to the public opinion that they have their own agenda, the agenda is completely separated from the dramas or from the tragedies in the very period in which the G20 happens, means it's a big problem. So the flexibility in the management of the agenda is absolutely necessary. So I end up here, and I would like really to say that this exercise too is very important because it's a big push for the Chinese leadership and for China as a whole to take seriously this leadership. It will be very important for the G20 itself. Thank you.